Oh, no, 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 it's all good. I know how to do but here it's wrong. No, it's all good. Testing, testing. Oh. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment. If you'd like to take your seats, please. And while folks are getting seated, I'm just going to make sure that the Zoom room can hear me. If someone can type in the chat with a thumbs up or even a random letters or thumbs down. Great, fantastic, thank you. Okay, welcome everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Stephanie Lang. I'm the Director of Operations for the Kelowna Homelessness Research Center. And to get us, started, I'm going to hand this over to Sarah to welcome you to our event and explain what's happening here today. Sarah.
Hello, everyone. First off, thank you all so much for joining us today in the beautiful central Okanagan United Church in downtown Kelowna, and also for those who are joining us over Zoom. We really appreciate your presence here today in what is sure to be a meaningful day of learning, togetherness, and a mutual appreciation for the experiences that shape who we are and how we show up for each other in the world. My name is Sarah Stokely-Lurch, and I am a Fulbright research recipient from the US. A year ago, shortly after finishing my undergraduate degree in public policy, I received a Fulbright research grant to conduct research in Toronto. For the past 8 months, I've had the distinct pleasure of working with an incredible, passionate team of researchers at the MAP Center for Urban Health Solutions at Unity Health Toronto. As a member of the LGBTQ+ community myself, my project is focused on the lived realities of adults who experience homelessness, who identify as QS LGBTQ+. As we all know, homelessness is a complex public health challenge, and mitigating this challenge requires all of us working together and putting our heads together to identify and implement robust solutions that are rooted in equity principles, which is why I am so glad to see such an amazing collection of individuals joining us here and virtually today. I would like to thank a few people for helping put this panel together. First, so many thanks to Stephanie, John Graham, and the Kelowna Homelessness Research Center for jumping into this project when I first reached out to them about it 2 months ago. This event would not have been possible without the tireless and enthusiastic support of the KHRC. I would also like to thank my colleagues in Toronto at the MAP Center for Urban Health Solutions for believing in me and this side project and for inspiring me daily with their passion for this work. I would also like to extend an appreciation to the Fulbright organization for funding my journey to Canada and for allowing me to make so many amazing connections here in Canada. Lastly, a huge thank you to our amazing panelists joining us today, Ian, Carmen, Chris, Bree, Wilbur, and Lazzy. Thank you guys so much for sharing your expertise, your time, and your knowledge with us here today. Today's event is about connection and learning, and as you listen to our panelists, I invite you to consider your own journey and connection to the topics that will be discussed today. A Q&A session will follow each panel. Thank you all again so much for joining us, and I hope that you enjoy today's event.
I would also like to start us off by acknowledging that the land on which we gather, work, play, and research is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Silks Okanagan peoples. We are going to welcome up John Graham in just a moment. I just want to give a couple of housekeeping pieces. And so first and foremost, we'll have a chat from John, and then we're going to hear from Wilbur about this wonderful piece of art that you see on, well, for you folks, it's on your left. And then we're going to move into our first panel, which is our seniors and homelessness panel. And so we'll have a break. There are some refreshments and snacks at the back, but please feel free that if you need to nourish your body before that break, to do so at your leisure. There are bathrooms located just here, here, and over here. And now I'm going to turn it over to our principal investigator at the KHRC, John Graham.
Well, we're really pleased you're here with us. Thank you all for being here. Each one of you is a very important part of the solution to homelessness. So we're a community engaged team of researchers, and we can't do our work without you. And we need to do our work continuously with you. We're in for the long haul. We've been doing this work now for over 4 years. And please continue to stay in touch with us. As interesting ideas come up, let us know. We're going to continue to do these sorts of knowledge mobilization forums at least 3 times a year. And so we're so pleased you're here with us today, and we look forward to continued collaboration. As a spoiler alert, we have a couple of exciting projects that are rolling over the next 7 years, including a major project that we'll be talking further to about over the coming 18 months, involving 8 different cities across the country, leading that 8 cities of comparable size to us. And some of the innovations that we can share within and across these geographic jurisdictions, I think, will be extremely helpful to us and to our other partners across the country. I want to acknowledge Judy Gillespie, my successor as Director of the School of Social Work, who's here today. Thank you for being here with us. Eric Lee is here, Selena Mema, Kylie Meyer. Who else have I missed from the KHRC?
Our former Associate Research Coordinator, Kyler Woodmass.
Kyler Woodmass is here, of course. And we've got some distinguished panelists here. I encourage you to log into the KHRC website. People always say, don't fiddle with your phones. I say, go ahead, fiddle with your phone. Take a look at the KHRC website as we're talking away. There's wonderful biographies of all of our distinguished panelists, and I commend it to you. And finally, I want to thank the incomparable Stephanie Lang for all that she does. Stephanie rules. The entire center would grind to an alarming halt were it not for Stephanie. And Sarah, thanks an awful lot for reaching out to us. I mean, it's the instigation of these two that make today possible. So kudos to Sarah and Stephanie for this project. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those kind words, John. Wilbur, if I could welcome you up. Wilbur, as I mentioned, is going to speak to us about, again, this beautiful banner that we have here and how it came to be.
Good afternoon, folks. This beautiful banner was brought to Kelowna in the Okanagan by the 2S LGBTQI plus community and allies. The message, "You belong," and translated a phrase to match it from the sealed language is "Kuyaya ku chinquithim nahim," and that means we are all together, we join in together. And this powerful message resonates with the connection that we all have to each other, regardless of our identity. And we brought this, I am the founder and president of Advocacy Canada, the organization that's behind this message. And we brought it to a billboard campaign last year for 16 weeks on 2 billboards in West Kelowna and Lake Country. And over 3 million people saw that billboard, according to the stats provided to us by Pattison. And this beautiful message was brought about because of the targeted attacks against the queer community, the trans community, and the impact that it has on folks in the community. And so we felt that we needed to bring a message that would uplift and bring joy to folks. And so we now have it on banners that, for example, the Central Okanagan United Church has placed. You'll see it on their tower outside, which is amazing. And we have it on shirts, postcards, and hoodies that are available for folks to get on our website. So you can go to okubelong.com and find the message. And also really acknowledge thanks and gratitude to the Silk Language House for providing us with consultation on the language and the connection to the Indigenous community. So if you have any questions, you can talk to me later about it.
Thank you so much, Wilbur. All right, so we are going to get started with our seniors panel first. If I can invite Ian, Chris, and Carmen to join me up at our panelists table, please. Oh, and I'll be moderating this one.
Can I ask you something? Is this gonna be put on YouTube?
Our recording will be available next week on our website. Yes. Thank you for the great question. So to start off our panel, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves and speak for a few moments before we start asking questions. Carmen, if you could get us started.
Yeah, you bet. Hello, everybody. My name is Carmen Rempel. I serve in the role of Executive Director at Kelowna's Gospel Mission. I can't imagine a more intimidating group of people to speak in front of today. The entire back row over there, the people I consult on a regular basis when I have questions around homelessness, but it's an honor to be here today.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me. My name is Chris Danielsen, and I come to you today as 4 different people, 4 different sides. I come to you from home, family, and business. I come to you as a former homeless person. I come to you as a reaching home or housing first worker, and now I'm a counseling therapy student. I'm a 62-year-old mother of 3, and I have 2 grandchildren. I have worked and paid taxes since I was 14 years old. I have built and run 2 businesses that were each 6 figures. I was the co-founder of Put Kids First, which was an organization that I founded when a little girl was abducted and murdered in my neighborhood. And we spent 10 years lobbying and brought the National Sex Offender Registry to Canada. I sat on the Community Consultative Group, the Integrated Services Group. I was a coach at the YMCA. I was a crossing guard. I was a soccer mom, a hockey mom, a dance mom, and in my spare time I did laundry. And 2 days before Christmas, in my 50s, I came home and everything was gone. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I looked around and I ran upstairs and my son's passport was gone, his clothes were gone, he was gone. My bank accounts were empty. My credit cards were racked up. And within 1 year, I had lost everything I had ever worked for my whole life, and I became homeless. I spent 3.5 years couch surfing, sleeping on friends' floors, or sleeping in my car in the Walmart parking lot. I was one of the lucky ones because I had done so well previously, and I had connections in my community. 3.5 years later, I got to become a housing first worker, and I've spent the last 7 years housing homeless people, getting to know people and understanding their stories and realizing it's not what we think. And I try and spread the message these days that when you see a homeless person, don't judge them, Don't label them. Look at them as really strong people surviving trauma, waiting for help.
Hi everyone, my name is Ian Gerbrandt and I'm with the Seniors Outreach and Resource Center. What brings me here today is my work with older adults with the Seniors Outreach. We provide a variety of social services designed to enhance belonging, independence, and well-being. And I guess a concern for me is a big part of what we do is help people connect to services or supports that can help them. And we're just getting way too many stories like Chris and many others. Each person's journey is unique. But boy, when I started, I've been working in social services for 25 years, the last 6 years with older adults. 6 years ago, people were walking into our centers needing help to understand their options because they need supports at home. So understanding home supports or how does assisted living work. Now they're walking in, sitting on the edge of homelessness. They got their 60-day eviction notice and they're just wondering how they're going to make it work. So what brings me here today is just to share some of our experiences with the people we try to support and share our thoughts on what we think some of the solutions are. And ultimately, as John said, we're not going to solve this issue without working together. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. So I'll start off with our first question. What do you feel are the causes of seniors experiencing homelessness? And Carmen, I see you have the microphone right now, so you are going to answer first if you're okay with that.
Sure, and then these two can improve. So at the Gospel Mission, one of the things that we say all the time, so whether it's seniors or whoever else, is that homelessness exists at the intersection of financial poverty and social poverty. So I think it's a really easy test for many people. If you were to lose your income, lose your home, something tragic happened, most people have one of these in their pockets, filled with at least a dozen people that you could call, that would take you in, friendly neighbors, family. And so those who we see falling into homelessness are those who don't have the social network to fall back on when their financial challenges arise. We saw this pointedly last summer during the wildfires. Gospel Mission was there helping out with our brave friends at the city at the group lodging site at Prospera Place. Now, there were thousands of people who were displaced from their homes, but there were not thousands of people sleeping at Prospera. The people who were sleeping at Prospera were the ones who didn't have the disposable income for a hotel, and those who didn't have the social network to fall back on. So those are the same folks that end up walking through the doors of our shelters at the Gospel Mission. Those who are socially impoverished for some reason. So we've seen an increase, which we can talk about later, of seniors, people who are redefined as over 55, which I know people have argued is way too low. Apologies. But we are seeing more and more of our older adults who are walking through the doors of our shelters as first time experiencing homelessness. And many of them are widowers. Many of them are newcomers to Canada. Many of them potentially have a mental illness or have an addiction, which causes behaviors that have severed their relationships with their family ties. And for those many complex reasons, they find themselves without the social network to fall on when hard times come. Complement that with the rising cost of literally everything, and we're just seeing, we're hemorrhaging seniors coming through the doors of our shelters more and more. Kelowna's Gospel Mission also has 4 homes for women that are now 100% made up of women over the age of 55, which has more complications to talk about later. That's my short answer.
Thank you, Carmen.
I'm going to start with a stat. 24% of our new population of homelessness now is seniors, and 45% of them have never been homeless before. As an outreach and a housing first worker, the people that I see that are falling through the cracks, women that have been married their whole lives and their husbands have died. I can tell you one story that all of a sudden her bills weren't paid and her house insurance wasn't paid, and then she had a fire and now she's homeless. There's little things like that that happen all the time. It's not an isolated story. And all of a sudden they're homeless and they don't know what to do. And the services that are supposed to be there, not like your services, but there's other services I found, they weren't there to help me. A lot of the service, they looked at me and went, well, you were successful, you made too much money last year. We're gonna make you jump through so many hoops, you're never gonna get anything. And that's exactly what happened. I see a lot of women that quit their jobs to go take care of their elderly parents. And then their parents pass away. And now the retirement money that they have or the pension that they had paid into is not nearly keeping up with what the expenses are these days. A lot of the men I work with that have done labor jobs most of their life, and then they get hurt at work and they fall through the cracks of the organizations that are supposed to help them when they get hurt, and they don't. So now they're homeless, and now they're on the street and they're having to self-medicate because they're hurt. So those are some of the people that I see, and again, like you were saying, there's so many people that are on the brink. I thought I had it made, I was getting ready to retire. And next thing you know, everything's gone. There's also a lot of scams right now. People, a lot of the older people, if they don't have people taking care of them, they're getting scammed and they're losing a lot of money. It just happened to my father. He just got scammed out of $350,000 from his carry. Yeah. And yes, the police have opened a file, but where he lives in Vancouver, there's only 2 police for that fraud unit. So we're going on our 3rd year now of waiting.
Yeah, I think a lot of different stories, but big kind of trends we're seeing is just the rising cost of living. Our system of care just hasn't kept up with that rising cost, right? So the seniors we work with, 1 in 4 in BC live on less than $23,000 a year. So you look in Kelowna, what are we talking about? There's 6,000 seniors that are low income. Like, it's trending the wrong direction. For the longest time, seniors had the lowest poverty rates, and it's going backwards. And now you're seeing seniors organize stuff like the Tin Cup movement, because the system of care hasn't kept pace with the rising cost of living, and housing is a big part of that. The shortage of housing is another issue. We all know that here in Kelowna, how hard it is to find housing. Super hard to find affordable housing, like rent geared to income or social housing. So, and unfortunately, BC leads the nation in no-fault eviction. So far too many seniors we see get their 60-day eviction notice, so no fault of their own. The landlord maybe decide to sell the property, or they're going to renovate it, or a family member's moving in, and now a senior who is in a rent-controlled unit, maybe paying $800 a month, is trying to find something in our market where they got to pay $1,200 a month, and they're on a fixed income. The math just doesn't work. And a number of people that come into our office and they say, I never thought this would happen for me. I worked my whole life for this. And that's where I get concerned. I believe everybody should have shelter or a roof over their head. But man, it's just people who live the conventional life are finding themselves, for lack of a better term, in this situation. It's really, really challenging. Yeah, and I'll share some more later.
Ian, can you actually tell us a little bit more about the Tin Cup movement?
To be honest, I don't know too much about it. I know in Vernon, there's some seniors got together and started it, and now it's taking root. There's a big event in June. But I just think it's interesting that, the seniors feel like their needs aren't being met. So an example of that is, there's all kinds of stats that kind of show that, like, over half the waiting list for BC housing in Kelowna are seniors. And some of them will wait 2 to 3 years before they get their home. So when they walk in our doors, giving help to try and navigate social housing, to hear that, that's tough. And that's not everybody's story. It depends on a lot of variables on whether they're willing to move and all those kinds of things. But yeah, and just the sheer number of seniors. I think a particular group that's vulnerable here in Kelowna is seniors who've been like 1 in 4 spend more than 50% of their money on rent. So for example, a lot of the seniors that find themselves in a situation are women who are in the caregiving economy. So they work as care aides, daycare workers, or self-employed in a salon. They didn't have a big pension, so they're relying on their old age security, guaranteed income supplement, and their BC supplement. If that's what you rely on, and you look at what the average rent is, they can be spending 75 to 80% of their money on housing if they had to pay the average rent. So these kinds of issues are really catching people. Some of the things we're seeing. So that's why I think they're out in the streets saying, enough's enough. Like, yeah, they need help.
I'll actually add one more thing to that. For the seniors, a lot of times when they get evicted, if they end up in the hospital and maybe they don't have anybody to go and give the landlord their rent, I see that a lot as well. So the landlord will use that as a way to evict them because they can turn around and get an extra $500 a month more than they're getting right now. So they go in the hospital, they miss paying their rent, and that's it. Now they're homeless.
So research is showing that more seniors are experiencing homelessness or housing instability than ever before. Can you folks speak to that in Kelowna?
I think I don't know what to say beyond what's already been said. This is a money problem. When we're talking about homelessness, it can be so complex. I mean, we talk about all the different factors, but the predominant reason why we're seeing such an increase now, it comes down to money. It comes down to our housing crisis. I think it's actually that simple. Ian,
I think you're right. It's about affordability, right? Income and housing and all that. A woman we helped a couple of years ago, she was to kind of reinforce some things we talked about. Not her real name, I'll call her Lucy. She was 73. Our housing navigator, we have to create a position just dedicated to nothing but navigating safer subsidies in BC housing and stuff like that. There's how many calls we're getting now. She was thoughtful. She said, I'm going to give my card to the people at Walmart, and if you see somebody in their parking lot that you're concerned about who's older, give me a call. And we met Lucy, and she was living in the car. She was a care aide, so she combined a bunch of small jobs to make a full-time job go. And when the pandemic started, given her age, and you have to remember the pandemic, it was scary at the beginning with what was happening before vaccinations came. She thought, you know what, maybe it's time to retire. So she did, and because of the benefits that were available during the pandemic, she could make a go of it, right? But then who predicted that the housing would just skyrocket like it did? And her landlord said, now's the time to sell my unit. He sold his property, he had every right to do so in West Kelowna. And there's a lot of secondary rental units in our community that don't have the same kind of protections. So she got her 60-day eviction notice, and she just could not find anything that would work within her budget. And she was living out of the car. It was interesting, you talked about, I used to work with youth a lot, and you used to talk about youth homelessness being hidden. It's not about age, it's about your first experience with homelessness. The seniors do the same thing. They sofa surf, they stay in their cars, they're in camps. And for Lucy, being in the car, I would say that, dehydration is bad for everybody. It can be acute for our seniors. So she ended up getting blood clots in her legs, and she had to get to the hospital to resolve those issues. So when you look at her story, a woman in the caregiving economy, a renter, got the no-fault eviction, income wasn't adequate, all those things. Fortunately, there is a good news to Lucy. We've been talking pretty dark stuff. The stuff that is rewarding is just, boy, the resilience of people is just, it's amazing to watch how tough people are, and just, in the face of things where I think I would give up, they're still being thoughtful and coming in and bringing us brownies to say thank you for helping me. In Lucy's case, we were fortunate that after we got her some medical interventions for the blood clots, we were able to kind of get her in some temporary housing with turning points, being patient. Eventually she got into one of Kelowna Gospel Mission's homes, Harmony House, where Carmen can speak to it better than I. I don't know what the intention of the housing is, but I know it's a lot of older women living there now. And yeah, so she was fortunate. Yeah, she's doing much, much better now that she's kind of in a permanent home.
I just saw Lucy before coming here. And she is in high hopes.
Hello?
And doing quite wonderfully and actually
Hello?
passionate about now sharing her story with others and helping others along, and it's really good, but it does bring up the question of work. And so when you're a senior and you have some pretty severe health challenges, how do you make more income? And so that's a question that we have, and we also have for, of course, our policymakers, of course, about income and certain clawbacks for seniors, and we're curious about a lot of those things. Yeah, she's doing well.
So speaking of some challenges then, can you, each of you, speak a little bit to some of the unique needs or challenges that seniors who are at risk of or experiencing homelessness may have? Let's dive into that a little bit more.
So every morning when I get to my office, I have the same routine. I say hi to everybody, I get a cup of coffee, I turn on my computer, and I read the critical incident reports from the night before. The number one critical incident report that we have is a health-related issue. So a critical incident report is written every time we have to call 911. So people think, so we operate 2 shelters, 4 women's homes, and an outreach team that's out 365 days a year. So the assumption from people is often that our critical incident reports have to do with a toxic drug poisoning or a behavioral issue that we had to call 911 for. It's false. The majority, something like 70% of our critical incident reports, we're calling 911 to call an ambulance for a health-related issue. Predominantly seizures, heart attacks, strokes, and GI issues. We also have lots of infections that get out of control to the point where we actually have to transport somebody non-emergency but still via ambulance. A lot of that, there's been lots of advocacy work, and we have good allies in the room who have done a lot so that we can actually bring health supports to folks who are staying in shelters right now, and we're hoping to see the needle move when it comes to supporting people where they're at for better health outcomes for our people. But it is interesting, right? So for some of my team, like I've been in this work 4 years. I have team members who have been in this 18, 19 years. I mean, you talk to them, just the face of homelessness and the challenges that we are addressing now are so vastly different than they were 10 years ago. And I feel like we were saying that, we're saying, okay, yeah, the beginning of the opioid crisis, emergency shelter work had to change in response to that. And then now, I feel like we're gonna be saying the same thing about, oh yeah, and then we had the silver tsunami, right? And then the homelessness response had to change again. It feels like right now we're in that changing, we're in that shifting, where we actually have to adapt how we hire and who we hire and how we fund and what supports we put in place on the ground in shelters, because the needs we're meeting now, it's COPD, right? It's heart attacks, it's a lot of, because we are dealing with an aging population. So one of the things, and of course, when you have people, especially who have been chronically homeless, you age different. You do, right? Add 15 years. One year in a shelter or 1 year in the streets is worth 3 in a home. So we are finding people, even though they may be 60, their health may look like a 70-year-old or 75-year-olds, right? Depending on how much time they've spent on this out in the elements. And so we see rapid decline of health, and so we have to adapt. But so those are some of sort of the emerging needs when it comes to health.
Older adults have different needs than younger people. I work with a project for the last 7 years called Aging in the Right Place. And one of the things we've realized through a lot of research and studies is it's very hard when you're older and you have injuries and you don't have the energy you did when you were 20 or 30 or 40 or even 50. It's really hard to, if you even have to go see a doctor, to get on a bus and go across town. And then maybe you have to go to the income assistance office because your check didn't come. So now you've got to wait around, you've got to go there, and nothing happens there, so maybe you have to go to one of your services to get help. All of this takes up your whole day, and you don't have the energy, you don't have the time. We're really trying to, we have 3 projects going across Canada, and we're trying to get in-house services. So if you're in a home with seniors, then everything is there for you. Your healthcare team is there for you. People are there to help you get meals or food or get you to the doctor or whatever it is you need, even if you have a caregiver or somebody that you need to spend the night. Things like that, if you think about it, are a lot cheaper than having to call an ambulance every night. It would be so much easier to have little 2-bedroom places where there's one for your caregiver at night and one for there, and your doctor's down the hall, and your income assistance person's there, or you've got somebody that comes in every day that visits 3 or 4 of those different buildings, and it helps you fill out your paperwork. So many of the seniors don't get that stuff done because you give up. I was strong and I'm a fighter, and I still gave up all day long because to get the services were just too hard. There was days, if it wasn't for the fact that I still had one of my kids was younger, I would have opted out because it was just too hard.
Yeah, the fixed income we already talked about. That's kind of a unique thing for a lot of the older adults, is just kind of a fixed amount of money that they're trying to operate from. Some of them have different costs than other people do because of medications they have to have. Like that blood clot I talked about, the blood thinning one is not covered. That someone has to be paid out of pocket, that kind of thing. Technology is a barrier for a lot of older adults. We work with a lot of stuff that's driven online, and they need help navigating those resources. Like, you know, just getting locked out of my account with CRA is a common thing we run into, right? And just trying to get people into that, right? Phone changes and now your 2-factor authentication's gone, and so just funny things like that. Accessibility is a big thing as far as how your center's designed. Like when I walk in, right away I start to notice how high is the bed and toilets off the ground. Is there grab bars in the showers? Is there a step to get into the shower? All these kinds of things, and we're having to think of differently how our shelter and temporary housing is built. Temporary housing is super lacking in our community. As you get older, it's going to be common that you might need extra hands with things, and we don't have enough housing that has some housekeeping or meals brought in. So we have a program called Better Home, funded by the United Way, that provides like subsidized housekeeping and transportation and groceries. I think it's interesting that we're getting calls from the John Howards and CMHAs or Turning Points. Can you help our older clients with housekeeping so their tenancy's not at risk? We never thought that would hit our radar, right? So just there's a lot of it's an endless list of what some of the unique needs are for the older adults, but those are some that come to mind for me.
We can't talk about this without talking about brain injury and dementia. So that's one thing that we're having daily challenges with right now in our shelter context and in our supportive housing is when we see this cognitive decline happen. We are not equipped for this. And so then we're actually put in this position where we have to talk about people who are out of scope of our care. So somebody may be, early stages of dementia, they're unable to care for themselves. We are unable to provide the care that they need, but where else do they go if the alternative is the street? So there's a morally injurious element to that for us as organizations and us as a society as we're trying to figure out what to do. Another piece is, because I've been saying this for the past 4 years, is that a part of what we do in the shelter context is we're actively doing palliative care. We are caring for people in the end stages of their lives, whether we like it or admit it or not. That is often what we're doing. That's very sad. And there are better ways that we could be doing this, but it does require, it requires a lot, it requires a different rethinking and acknowledgement that the landscape has changed, and so must we.
So let's talk about how initiatives or programs or interventions like Better Home that's been mentioned earlier, what do you folks feel is needed to address seniors who are experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness in our community?
I got two answers for that.
We will bring a mic over to you in just a moment. I'm just gonna open it up to Q&A in the audience after this question. So keep that in mind.
I think we need, for starters, to start bringing the right people to the table. I've just moved up here, so I'm not talking about anybody up here, just so you know. Prevent that. But I have worked for organizations in other places, and you can't teach and you can't fix what you don't know. And so many people are at the table getting big paychecks, and money is being absolutely wasted in the most ridiculous ways, and they don't have a clue. So we need to start getting lived experience and the right people at the table. And I think for the people that hand out the money, you know, there was a study done a long time ago out of the States, and it was dubbed Millionaire Murray, I think. And they followed about 18, don't quote me on the exact, but they followed about 18 people around for a year that were homeless, and they added up what it cost. And Murray had spent $1 million in services in 1 year. And after that year, you don't get anything out of that $1 million. You're now starting on the second million. It would have been cheaper to put them up in waterfront property with a maid. The services add up really quick when you're having to call 911 and a fire truck comes and an ambulance comes and the RCMP or the police come, and then they have to go to the hospital and they use up a bed there. So if we can get to our politicians and the powers that be and let them know, it's a lot cheaper to set this up properly right now and take care of the people that have worked their whole lives and have earned this, than to do it the other way around. So yeah, the right people at the table that can give solutions, and the right people writing the checks to the right projects.
Yeah, good point, Krista. We're gonna pay for this in some way, no matter what, right? And sometimes not providing the supports in an earlier way, it actually ends up being more expensive. I was part of a provincial housing working group with the community-based senior services sector and sponsored by the NOA. They had a great report called Aging in Uncertainty and talk about the growing crisis of housing precarity for seniors. I would recommend looking at that. It's a really comprehensive look at you know, what some of the stories are for the growing crisis, but also a basket of recommendations. So just some things that come to mind for me. I'll just say that my bias personally is programs can help people find a way forward to beat the odds, but a good policy change can just change the odds. So one that we were really hammering home the last while was increasing the safer rental subsidy for seniors. And I'm glad that the province did something last week. Wasn't all the way. If you're gonna have a subsidy, it should be, I feel, indexed to inflation. And I think it's a choice. There was a time, it was a national disgrace, seniors poverty in Canada, and they came out eventually with old age security and guaranteed income supplement. But when it first came out, you had to know it existed, you had to apply, you had to apply every year. What happens now? You file your taxes, you get it, right? They could do that too with safer. But it was great that they did do that increase. So for me, the reason I bring that up is a good example of sometimes a good policy change that actually gives people the money they need to live better is something I'll always advocate for. We need more housing, like I talked about, especially rent geared to income housing, subsidized temporary housing is just critically needed. I think it'd be great to have a geriatrics outreach team. Some communities have that are larger than ours. boy, we end up throwing a lot of things to our interior health, mental health team that I don't think is in their scope. Because it's a lot of, to your point, I forgot to talk about the memory stuff, but sometimes it's not that, it's bladder infections, it's their hearing, and people assume because of ageism that it's memory loss when there's other underlying things. And a good geriatrics outreach team can start to distinguish what's got a biological nature or what might have a mental health nature. Yeah, and just some other services that help people be successful in their housing is really important too. There's a good one called A Whole Way Home. That is a really good program that provides tenant support services and social connections for seniors in their housing. Yeah, so there's lots of different interventions that I think need to happen. There's no one solution.
Yeah, we sneak cranberry juice into just about everything at the Gospel Mission to help with UTIs. Like, legit, one of the things that I'll say, because I think it's like great about the policy changes, the funding changes, the housing supply. So I guess the one thing that I'll say that I think bears mentioning, and this is going back to the social isolation piece. So when we're thinking about housing solutions, let's start talking about what it means to house people, not housing them into isolation, but housing them into community. So I think co-ops are coming back and group homes and various places where we allow seniors to live in community with each other. I don't think that just applies to older adults. I think that applies to loads. I actually think independence is a myth. I think independence is a Western construct. But truly, none of us are independent. We're actually all radically interdependent upon each other. We are herd animals as humans. We are meant to survive together. Nobody can, like they talk about what the first evidence of civilization is a healed femur bone, right? Evidence that a group of people took care of the sick. That's evidence of society, of civilization. And in the same way, we are not meant to live alone. So I actually think that there's some philosophical, ideological things that we need to abandon, like single family homes, and let's see a rise in more community living, and be okay with that. And let's destigmatize multi-generational homes, and things like that. Anyway, yeah.
Yes. That was a here moment if there ever was one. Thank you all so much for answering some of the questions that Sarah and I had put together for you, but I know that there are going to be some really fantastic questions coming from our audience here in the room and coming from our audience on Zoom. And so I'm going to turn it over to these folks. And Nabreen, hand up, please. Thank you so much. If you have a question in the audience, please just pop your hand up. Nabreen's going to come right over to you with this mic. We want to be sure that the folks on Zoom can hear the questions as well. So let's get started. And then folks on Zoom, I know that you've been adding some, or I hope that you've been adding some questions in, getting yourselves prepared. Emma, if you could put your hand up whenever there's a question from Zoom. Nabreen, you can go on over to Emma. Thank you.
The thing what I would like to bring up is when it comes to seniors or anybody who lives on a disability, the government should quit fooling around and bringing up the shelter portion to what it costs for a place to rent, and do that and give money to the ones who can't afford it, who are working on minimum wage.
That's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up.
And before taxes, I'm getting $17.64.
One of the problems when I house people that are on disability, it's You know, when you're getting $375 is the rent portion on your disability check, but the cheapest place you can rent is $1,700 or $1,800, and then you've got to pay for your hydro and everything on top of it, it doesn't work. So now we're putting them in substandard housing. We're putting them in places that should be torn down. We're putting them in places with mold and rats. And we're doubling and tripling them up. And they're being referred to as, you know, the slum landlords taking advantage of them. And I don't feel good saying this, but thank God that was there, because it was the only place we had to put them. And what a sad thing to say. I've housed dozens of seniors in places like that, because that was the only option for them. So I agree with the gentleman 100%. Let's start making sure they've got the money to pay rent, live in a decent place.
I just wanted to touch on substance use. It's not something that was talked about yet. I know that we all know that substance use is a means of survival when you're on the street, surviving trauma. So can you touch on the barriers that exist in long-term care and in housing with regards to substance use?
Again, for those that, I just moved up here, so I'm gonna talk specifically for down at the coast, but I'm sure a lot of it is the same everywhere. For the seniors that are using substances, most of the homes won't allow them to come in. It's a huge barrier. And there's nowhere for them to get detox and then to get into proper long-term so that they can be clean and sober and move forward in their lives. So when a senior who's been out on the street and is now using because they're in chronic pain, they were put on Oxycontin or something, and now they're on the street, they can't afford it, and I've heard that story so many times. Okay, I wanna get off, can you get me detox? So you spend the afternoon phoning around to try and find them a bed, and you can't. And they say, well, we're probably gonna have a bed in 4 or 5 days. Well, now they're getting dope sick, so they have to go out and use, otherwise they're gonna be really sick. And then you can't find them because you don't know where they're sleeping, and around it goes. So now again, the system has paid for 2 or 3 people to sit on the phone and call for something that's not there. A complete waste of resources.
I got to visit a hospice for the homeless in Toronto. And the question can come up specifically about why would you need a separate space? Why do people who are homeless need to die in a hospice specific to them? Isn't that stigmatizing? Isn't that segregation? And it was interesting because the main reason why they were there is because they're still in their active substance use. And even though they're in the late stages of dying, you know, the thought is, okay, this person has been using for this many years, they've got 3 months to live, they're not gonna stop using now. And so it was allowing them to die with dignity, without any unrealistic expectations of their sobriety in their final stages. And it was an extraordinary team that was there. Because the doctors, you can imagine the risk that they're taking, prescribing certain medications while they know that the patient is also consuming other medications that are unregulated and are mysteries. And so there's all sorts of liabilities, and it was a really fascinating experience to go and see. And so, yeah, the question is there's many different holes in our continuum of care, and that one certainly has my curiosity for here.
Thanks. We have 2 questions from online. The first one is racism a factor in your area, and how does that affect older people that you work with?
is racism not a factor anywhere? Yeah, I don't know what, yeah, I don't know what else to say about that, you guys.
I can say yes.
Yeah, like, yes, of course.
And then we have another question, which perhaps more of a comment, but living in communities is part of decolonizing and reassuring that we need each other in order to stay healthy, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritual. Hi there, thank you so much for your presentation this afternoon. So I guess my curiosity is about just the conversations that are happening at the regional level or provincial level and sort of that powers that may be piece. So from your standpoint, what conversations are not yet happening that needs to be highlighted and brought into light? And with who and who needs to be at the table, just kind of, I guess, going in deeper to what you were saying in those spaces.
I think the conversations that aren't happening are the ones that are gonna fix this. It's not rocket science, it really isn't. This should be an easy fix. And like I said before, with the $1 million Murray study, it would actually be cheaper to do it the right way. So one of the things I learned when we were lobbying for the National Sex Offender Registry is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And until more of this happens and the more educated people are about what's really happening, and the more you pick up the phone and you call your mayor, your MLA, your MP, and just, every time you're standing in line at Starbucks, make one 30-second call and say, you know what, this isn't okay with me, and just so you know, if you want my vote next time, you need to start dealing with this. I want to hear a lot more about this coming out of your office. Because that's where the power is.
Not sure to answer that. There's lots of competing priorities, right? So I think people just have to kind of continue to be vigilant and kind of raising awareness of what they think is needed and the concerns they have, and continue to do that. And I think policy change is kind of interesting. Like, how do you have a voice in Victoria, right? And so I was laughing because I met some guy briefly who says he's a seniors policy analyst. When I used to work in Winnipeg, it was really easy for me to get a meeting with an assistant deputy minister or senior policy analyst. I think when you're in Kelowna or even other smaller communities, you have to be way more thoughtful on how you're going to ladder up to some other initiatives that they have the same concerns you do, and how can I align with them so we can promote it locally, but be part of their effort regionally, provincially, nationally. So doing that, so it comes to mind. And then we just got to continue to collaborate and think of how we can work together better. I think, Kelowna, we've talked about coordinated access for a long time. We're still not there. So we just gotta get there, right? On kind of, and not to say there's no coordinated access, there's shared systems for doing VATs and housing, but there's another level of collaboration. I say true collaboration is when your respective budgets and your line tables start to change, or you have shared practices or procedures, or you know what I mean?
It's a really insightful question. Because I think, I don't know about what is a conversation that's not happening, because there's so many really good conversations happening right now. Like basically everything that we've spoken about, people are either already lobbying for it, there's already traction, we're already seeing some of our elected officials take heed and pay attention to it. I guess if they're, and so I think there's lots of good conversation. I think the question is always how do we go from conversation to action, right? And which that's the big question.
Oh, I have the mic here, the bug. Hi, I don't have a question, I have a comment. Thank you, very much, the three speakers for, saying everything so eloquently. I agree with everything that you're saying. I particularly enjoyed the storytelling aspect. Like I love the intersection between the poverty and the social isolation. The Trevor, would be better off, waterfront property with a maid. It would be cheaper, for the government to do that. And then Lucy's, story, which really could be anybody. So I guess my reflection is, for those of us that do research and that are plugged in different levels of government, we have data, we quantify, analyze, do statistics, but where is the storytelling? I think it's so powerful, and we may be missing something really important here for John, Stephanie. We need to think about the storytelling because it's so powerful, and it's something that perhaps we haven't utilized to the maximum here in the central Okanagan I'm talking about, So yeah, thank you. And that was my comment. It's not a question. I'm gonna pass the mic to my colleague here.
Okay, well, I'll plug your paper then. On the substance use, there's a discussion on housing for seniors with substance use needs. What are the options on the KHRC website? Anyway. I have a, beyond the housing and supports and services side, I think the poverty data came out today, and we're slowly returning to the pre-COVID, pre-large government transfer lines for seniors, a little more slower, but it doesn't seem to line up with what people are reporting in terms of, like you said, missing the $25,000. So if the official rate is like 8.7 now for 2022, but people are reporting having greater, is it greater depth of poverty that you're seeing, or is it the fact that even though CPP and OAS and GIS are indexed, is it that SAFER is not indexed? Is it that people with healthcare costs, financially speaking, seniors have the most indexed supports, but it's only half indexed, and still have the smallest share of poverty? So what is it something in particular that you can point to, or is it just a whole series of things on the finance side?
I think it is everyone's context is different, so it is a whole series of things. It's starting to catch up now. Some of the numbers, right? They really fell behind because the cost of living and the cost of just buying our groceries was rising faster than those indexes were. That's the bottom line. And then sometimes how they calculate things is not right? So the SAFER subsidy, the rent ceiling they used to calculate what you'll get for a rent subsidy in Kelowna was $750. It costs $1,200 a month. So what's the formula that's being used to determine what you're going to get? Those things matter. And sometimes there's differences too, right? So there's a different rate you're going to get if you're under 75 compared to if you're over 75. So it's just, there's lots of variables at play, I think, for that, as far as what makes it inadequate. I can't say the number one topic in all our groups that we meet now is, it's just taken over, is food. They just talk about where they can get the best deal for certain things, people sacrificing. You hear people not buying canned meat rather than fresh meat, those kinds of things. The request for our farmers market coupon program has gone through the roof. The food bank will tell you that the numbers are so high for them right now. So to me, that shows there's a disconnect between what people are getting and what they're having to pay. And I think we all feel in our own house. I feel like my grandparents, every time I go shopping, usually the price of that. But I mean, it's just that much more for people who are living on a limited income to try and weather those challenges.
Hi, thanks everybody for speaking today. It's been really good so far. My question is about wraparound services, and there's a lot of when there is talk about community living, right, or co-ops, or, you know, even temporary housing of the homeless in tiny homes, and, the ideas are great for wraparound services, right, they're much needed, but they're just everything always seems to stall right at that point, and I was just wondering what you consider to be the biggest barrier to implementing those wraparound services. Is it money? Is it coordination of services? Is it trying to get different agencies on board to cooperate?
Money.
Yeah, it's all money.
Subnote systems navigation. For sure. So we actually have a really collaborative group of service providers here in Kelowna. Like we are friends. We work together, we talk together a lot. There's constantly tables. So I kind of chafe a little bit when people talk about the need for more collaboration. So I think we actually do a lot of collaboration here in Kelowna. There's a lot of trust. And so truly, like when it comes to providing those wraparound services, it comes down to ideology of funding. And so from the shelter perspective specifically, it's like we're funded for a bed and a sandwich. And so everything on top of that, we have to either find grants or we have to fundraise in order to provide any additional services on top of that, or collaborate with other partners who are also only funded for sort of the bare minimum of whatever their core programming is. So we're kind of nickel and diming on some of the things that we need to be doubling down on, which becomes very frustrating, especially if you talk about, you know, any company, if you're going to build something to last, you're going to build it with a really strong foundation, which requires some sort of level of commitment of continuation of funding. And so, you know, any nonprofit executive, you know, you talk about grants, so I'll poke at funders for just a second. And if I hear another grantor say, we want an innovative, first time pilot project that's going to be self-sustaining in 18 months, like I'm just going to hurt something. So what we need is core, operational, continuous funding that we can flex with the needs. Then we can do a heck of a lot more.
Yes. I'll just add to that, I know for my funding, doing Housing First for Reaching Home, that's great that I can give you $500 a month, but guess what? At 9 months, it's over. That's it. So you finally get somebody housed, whether it's a young mom and a child or it's a senior. You get them housed, they get moved in, they start calming themselves down, getting grounded. Oh, subsidy's over. And you're back to square one.
I'll just add staffing challenges as a barrier. Like it's interesting, we've never poured more money into home supports or assisted transportation, but when you look at the actual hours of service for the rider or for the person in a home, it's never been lower, right? And part of the challenge is some of the money getting caught up in the planning of services than the actual delivery of services. And then I know people in home supports that are level 4 who should be seeing somebody every day who are having services canceled, right? So I think staff, it's just a bind out there for staff shortages. And just overall, I think the needs still outstrip what the resources are to do true holistic services. And sometimes I think the roles can get hard, right? I see some supportive housing where, boy, it's really hard to be the landlord who has to enforce certain things around taking care of the property and paying the bills, and to also be the support worker where, you know, you're supposed to be there at all times, right? So I think an ideal housing first is sometimes you have role definition in that kind of wraparound holistic services. It's really hard. I've managed supportive housing where you're trying to play both, and it can be really tough to navigate that line.
Actually, I'll add,
So we're gonna have time for 2 more questions. Bree is going to select those 2.
absolutely, I am gonna add this. speaking of not enough support, we need to start paying people that do these jobs properly. So, and I'll use, I'll use me for an example. So, I'm off work right now because I did get hurt at work. That's why I'm back at school and retraining. But before that, my job was to be in my chair at work to do housing first at 8 a.m. in the morning. And I would skip my lunch because I needed to be at my second job at 4 o'clock, and that's when I finished. And I would work there in a transition home for women and children fleeing abuse till midnight. And then I would get home about 1 o'clock, and I had to be in my chair at my other job again in the morning at 8 o'clock. And I did that 4 to 5 days a week. And then I worked on at weekends graveyard shift, either at second stage housing or at the transition house. I needed to do that, and I was doing that in my 50s and 60s just so I could pay my rent. My income from both of those jobs, over 50% of it was going just to my rent. So let's start paying people what they're worth in these jobs, and then so that we can actually just do a 40-hour week, what a concept. And then maybe we would attract more people to this industry to help.
Hi, I just want to say thank you for sharing all your experiences and your knowledge and expertise in the area. And I just wanted to ask if you could comment on, you mentioned this before in terms of seniors who may have chronic conditions, who have experienced heart attacks, strokes, experienced dementia, have different healthcare needs and scope of practice out of your practice. And I know there's wait lists for assisted living care, long-term care, or even community care to come in. And I just wanted to ask you from your perspective and experiences, what it's like to navigate those tensions and those spaces between your system and the healthcare system, and also the experience of the seniors who need round-the-clock care and can't get it, and they're homeless or underhoused.
Yeah, so we see those barriers that people can't get the supports they truly need, and it is tough. Like in theory, there's this continuum of being in your own home, supportive housing, assisted living, long-term care, and because we don't have enough of the right supports, I see in my work a lot of people being fast-tracked into long-term care that don't need to be there because they can live independently if they got the right supports, right? Whether it's someone dropping in to just help with the showering or dressing, you know what I mean? You don't have to be in assisted living unless you have unscheduled needs. Yet there's lots of people that can't get into assisted living for some of the reasons we talked about: substance use, brain injury. You have to be able to direct your care if you're going to get into assisted living. So it's not my field of expertise. As our housing navigator, she's great. She's a nurse. We always see this intersection of health and housing. And she used to be a long-term care case manager, and she's in the perfect role to kind of help people sometimes on kind of what is the right support you need. But it's tricky. For example, it's funny. It's not funny. It's sad actually that there's no assisted living facility in Kelowna as a lift. So you have to automatically go into long-term care for staff. So there's funny things that happen where, to your point of, people are not connected with the right intervention they need for their chronic health issues because of we lack certain resources at the right time for them.
Getting somebody into assisted living is very tricky, and the goalposts always change. You can bring somebody in to be assessed one day who clearly needs assisted living. And I've heard this, well, can you still brush your hair? Can you lift up your arm to brush your hair? I've had that specific question for one of my clients, and they said yes. She was in a wheelchair, She had diabetes and she just had her leg amputated. But she could still brush her hair and she got denied. It also puts a lot of people pitting against each other because there's one room's come available and I might have 6 people that I know need it. My colleague's got 3 people and the organization across the lane's got 3 people and we're all running and fighting for that same room. And it brings really hard feelings between the clients that maybe know each other as well.
So sort of case in point, if you're asking about navigating the system, like we have entire staff positions dedicated to helping people navigate the system because it is challenging and does feel like it's always shifting as funding comes and goes and positions come and go. And there's also an emerging casualization of the workforce. And lots of movement. So even if you might know the right person to call to get person to that service today, that might be different tomorrow and it might be different 6 months from now. So that's why, like in a shelter context, we have in each shelter specialized workers, and their main job is to just help clients navigate the system, right? They're case managers. And it's a real expertise. Like I don't know how to navigate the system. And they have to always be learning and adjusting, and you have to be have a pulse on things to help navigate people through. So if you didn't have that assistance of that case manager walking with you, I just can't imagine how people could figure it out on their own. It's tough. It's tough.
So the first question online is, you mentioned bereavement as a factor for people transitioning to homelessness for seniors. What do you hear from them about their grief journey while experiencing homelessness, and how do you help support them with processing that grief? It's quite a big question, sorry. Yeah.
And I didn't quite hear it, sorry, at the beginning, you have about bereavement?
Yeah, so Josh was asked, you mentioned about bereavement as a factor for people transitioning to homelessness and who are seniors. And the question is, how do you hear from them about their grief journey while experiencing homelessness, and how do you help support them with processing that grief?
What I've witnessed is that people experiencing homelessness and everyone who works in this sector is pretty much in constant grief. Yeah, absolutely. It's I would say concussive. It is continuous and assaulting grief because there is so much loss, and there's ambiguous loss. There's loss when somebody dies, there's loss when somebody loses a functionality they had previously, there's loss of hope, and we're kind of in a state of constant moral injury as well, both as service providers and folks who are staying in shelters. I remember this horrible moment. So grief is just present continuously to us, and so if we were talking before about funding and wraparound services, one of the services of the Gospel Mission that we've added is we have a director of soul care. It's a weird name for a position, but a lot of what they do is grief management with both our clients and our staff. His full-time job is to follow up after critical incident reports and other moments of acute need. And so he follows up both with staff who are present and with residents, and just touches base on how they're doing. And he runs individual counseling and group grief sessions daily. That's some of how we navigate the constant grief that's around, but it's really tough. There's a reason why we're seeing a casualization in the workforce, because I think, as one of my directors said this, well, yeah, of course, smart people don't do this job full time. It's tough. It's really, really tough. There's a deep emotional, psychological wounding that happens when you're exposed to such grief constantly. So burnout levels are high. So yeah, we're trying with extra supports, but again, how do you fund those positions? How do you fund those supports? My benefits package of the Gospel Mission is not great. We're do our very best, but it's expensive. So honestly, it comes down to funding as well.
I would add to that, they're also very angry and they're very frustrated. They can't believe what is happening after they've been good people and worked hard their whole life. And when you're going into some of the services to get help and you're angry and you're frustrated, the policies are, I don't have to help you. You can't talk to me like that. And the window's shut. So this person who's angry and frustrated and lost and full of trauma doesn't know where to go. And it just keeps perpetuating the feelings.
So we did this evaluation of our housing program, and of course, we had great results with the seniors connected to housing or subsidy. What surprised us was some of the feedback we got from the people we hadn't been successful yet. They spoke to how important it was that their experience or their feelings were validated, that someone saw them, someone heard them, took the time to walk alongside them. It was really a powerful reminder for us that sometimes you feel like you're not getting wins, you're still making a difference to that person, right? And as far as processing the grief and loss, just the peer support groups that are out there, like just being in a room with other people who also have had loss in their life, and some of them are further along in their journey, and it gives you hope of kind of, you know, you lose your loved one, it's just, it's learning to live with it, right? And it takes time for everybody. So we have found a lot of success with some of the seniors who've lost their loved one. Some of our guys, a big loss is when the keys are taken away and they can't drive anymore. A sense of loss with that is hard for some of them. So sometimes that loss is their identity as well. And yeah, so the peer support groups are huge. And sometimes if they need one-to-one counseling, we do our best to connect them with counseling. It's great, all these programs where they have university students being mentored and part of practicums providing these services, it really makes a difference. And it used to be that the Palliative Care Society would give somebody 4 to 6 counseling sessions for free. I don't know if they still do that, but yeah, those are some of the things we've done to help people process, I guess, grief, loss.
Thank you. What important questions, oh my goodness. Thank you to everyone. Unfortunately, we are actually over our time for this panel, so I need to move us on, but a big round of applause, please, for our panelists. Thank you all so much for your time. We will be taking a 15-minute break, so please join us back here in 15 minutes for our 2 LGBTQIA+ panels. I hope you had some time to grab a drink, grab a snack, and resettle yourselves. I invite everyone to join us in their seats again. And we are about to start our 2S LGBTQIA panel. And so if I could invite Wilbur, Lazzy, and Bree up to our table here.
Thank you so much, guys, again. We're gonna get started with the second panel. I'd just like to invite each panelist up here to just introduce themselves briefly, starting with Wilbur.
Oh, my name's Wilbur, my pronouns are he, him. And I am the founder and president of a nonprofit called Advocacy Canada, and we do advocacy work on behalf of the 2S LGBTQI+ community. Sometimes I refer to it as the alphabet mafia. I've been doing advocacy work for the community that I'm part of for almost 30 years, since I came out back in the 1990s. I'm an old guy. And I do this as a volunteer, so I don't have any income from doing this. And I am, because I also have a day job, because I'm also one of those seniors. I'm 66, I'm coming up 67 years old, who needs to work to pay for my housing and food and things like that. So I still work full time, and I do this as a volunteer in the community. And I'm kind of, sometimes it's overwhelming being in a position like that, because we're called upon to solve problems that we have no idea how to help, nor do we have the resources. And as a nonprofit, we have no sustainable funding. We don't have any staff. We're applying for funding. I love the comment that was made earlier about funders asking for innovative projects that are going to become self-sustaining. It's kind of a utopian, dreamlike world that could happen. And so one of the things that we are faced with is not having operation funding, so we don't have the money to pay for someone to do some of the legwork and operational work. We could get probably money for programs and things, but we don't have anybody to oversee those programs, so we're kind of stuck. So that's a little bit about me. I am a gay man. I came out when I was 38. I was raised in a high control religious sect. So I had experienced a lot of grief when I came out from losing my community. And so that informs some of the work I do as well.
My name's Lazzy. I go by they, them pronouns. So I'm here representing CMHA as one of their clients who's graduating out of their program. And I'm here to provide a very lived experience perspective because currently I'm in a rehab. I recently experienced homelessness. And it was a situation where I really encountered a lot of the unspoken stigma that's still present in our society around non-binary or gender fluid identities. A lot of treatment is just man, woman, like even where I'm living now is a women's treatment center. And I'm 9 months sober, which I'm very proud of. But I've really seen the need in my recovery for people to be able to be open about who they are, because if you can't accept yourself in the world, then recovery and housing and stability of any kind is gonna be the least thing from the priority in your mind. Yeah, I'll keep it short and sweet. I'm sure I'll warm up to the mic later, but I'm pretty nervous, so.
Also nervous. My name is Bree. I use pronouns she, her. I work as a counselor with This Space Belongs to You, providing free counseling for queer and trans and IBPOC youth. I work particularly with the queer and trans folks. I also am a group facilitator with them. I did a queer wellness group last year, and I work full-time at a treatment center here in Kelowna. I have some experience working in Housing First, in supportive housing, and outreach services. So I think I can speak to the intersection of all of those identities and the lived experience that comes with it. Yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Sounds great. Thank you guys for introducing yourselves. I'd just like to start with a simple question. Members of the 2S LGBTQ plus IA community are overrepresented in the homelessness community. Can you speak to why that may be? Starting with Bree, since you have the mic.
Well, we see with youth, starting with youth, the queer youth are overrepresented in homelessness, often due to rejection from their families or their caretakers. So that's a direct correlation there. And I think it's important when we talk about this to speak about people's internal experience, not only systemic and the experience that people have, you know, out in the material things that we've created. The internal experience of living with shame and guilt and fear really shape someone's path in life, especially when you're living in fear of those who are supposed to take care of you and those who are supposed to be looking out for you. I think it shapes your outlook, it shapes your confidence, it shapes your ability to move forward in the way that our society asks us to in terms of education and work and everything else. Yeah, that's my answer.
Just thinking, yeah, shame, I would echo that sentiment. That is the basis of a lot of people's instability, but I think with housing and shelter, that's specifically linked to the factor of nurturing, which is usually like a parent's job. And so when it's your parents rejecting you, I think that is, like, if someone comes out and their parents reject them, there's probably a lot of rejection in more subtle ways that's been building through life. So by the time that they're actually rejected by their parents, they've internalized experiences of not being accepted for who they are so strongly that even in the future, when they do have stability available to them, I think it's very difficult to trust that. Like, there's quite a lot of trauma related to that internal experience. Even the stuff that happens like long before someone ever comes out.
I'm going to share some stories. I love the comment that was made earlier by someone in the audience about the storytelling. And I believe that that is one of the things, and this is kind of answering probably a future question for the panel of things that could be done, but storytelling humanizes people. And it takes, turns what some of my folks might see as just objectivity into humanity. And so there's a few things that I believe are at the root of some of the homelessness in the 2SLGBTQI plus community, or I'm going to refer to it as the queer community. One is because of faith-based and religious doctrine. And we actually have a web page on our website, advocacy-canada.lgbt, which has a list of faith-based organizations in the Okanagan with a rating of whether they're safe spaces for the queer community or not. And some of them come with a warning and some of them come with a full stop. And so if you're interested, you can take a look at that. We have a form to fill out on that page too, where folks can actually give us more information. Some of the organizations we reached out to didn't respond to us to answer questions for probably obvious reasons, but I was just looking up on my phone here earlier. I had the page up on my phone, and then when I pulled it up again, it went to the top of a PDF document, and it's like 60 pages long, but it's the membership guide for one of the local churches. And it's particularly egregious in my mind because it's, for one thing, calls transgenderism as a result of sin in the world. So that's a very, very harmful ideology and doctrine that is just made up to be able to discriminate against folks. It also, the same document talks about the sanctity of marriage between a man and a woman, and that homosexual relationships are sinful. So there's some more thinking. And this particular church meets, unfortunately, every Sunday in the Rotary Center for the Arts. Now, we have 2 services there. And I talked to the Rotary Center about the harm of having this kind of doctrine in an arts and culture space. And they said, well, what is the harm? It's just their beliefs. The harm can be found on the streets in Kelowna, where there's homeless kids because of those beliefs. And that is one of I think is one of the primary reasons for homeless youth from the queer community, is because they either find it so difficult and challenging to live in a home with those kinds of beliefs that they choose to leave, or they're forced to leave by their parents. And I believe that the shame and the guilt that Bree was mentioning is the shame and guilt of the parents that is projected onto their children. And that shame and guilt comes from the belief that there's something wrong with their kids. The other thing that I think is one of the causes of, and I've seen it myself, is domestic violence. And domestic violence is something that doesn't just happen in the straight community. So earlier, I think it was last fall, I was contacted by a server at the White Spot restaurant here. Her mom actually contacted me because she knows me, and she said, my daughter came across a young man who's been the victim of domestic violence, and he's homeless. And what can you do for him? That was a pretty heartbreaking story. To see a 20-year-old man, I went and had coffee with him. He was beaten up, his hand was broken, his glasses were broken, he had a bruised black eye, broken cheekbone. And when the police were called, he called the police, and when the police came, they blamed him for being beat up. And he was beat up because he was trying to leave, and his partner didn't want him to leave. And then he was in the hospital, and the police visited him, and the police officer that talked to him told him that he was too effeminate, he couldn't deal with him, he would have to find somebody else. And because it was questioned about whether he was the victim or the perpetrator, he wasn't eligible for victim services. So here he was, homeless. He went to go back into his home after he came out of the hospital, and the landlord had evicted them and put all their stuff out on the street. So luckily, I was able to find some folks to help out, and he was able to find a couch to stay on. He also lost his job because he worked in a job where it was manual, and he couldn't work because of a broken wrist. So all of these things compound. The other reason is stigmatization and discrimination because of gender identity, and that causes homelessness. So a story, I have a senior trans woman who contacted me because she couldn't find housing because no one would take her in because of her being transgender. And she was finding it hard to get a job because of her physical presentation and being a transgender woman. I also had a call from a person who said that their friend, who was a trans woman, senior in a long-term care home, had ended up in hospital. And while she was in hospital, the long-term care home evicted her, and she said it was because she was trans. So those are some of the things that are actually going on in the community, and some of the things that are leading to homelessness, particularly among the trans community, trans women in particular. Another story is a trans woman had a tooth abscess, and because they were working a type of job where they didn't have benefits, they had no dental care, and it was easier for them to get an opioid prescription for pain than to get the dental treatment they needed, and they became addicted. And they ended up in the shelter downtown where they were sexually assaulted. So those are just some stories I want to share of the kind of things that are leading to homelessness that we're seeing. If you talk to the folks from the BGC Okanagan, they could tell you probably more about like stories of the youth that are homeless because of their sexual orientation or gender identity and because of the family situation.
Great, thank you for sharing those stories. It's so important that we hear the lived realities of individuals. And your stories definitely touched on this next question. What specific challenges may unhoused 2S LGBTQIA+ folks experience compared to non-2S LGBTQ+, unhoused folks?
I think a lot of it is there's barriers to accessing services just based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And I kind of mentioned the one situation with the victim of domestic violence and the reception they got from the police. The other thing is folks going into homeless shelters, especially trans people, it's not a safe environment for them. And there is stigma around having a trans woman in a women's shelter. So there's barriers there. The street trans youth, what are they going to do? Who's, you know, they've been put on the street at a time when they need a parental support, where they need the monetary support, housing support, so that they can get an education, and they're missing out on that. So the education, the lack of education is just going to be a vicious circle that they face going on in life, and not being able to have an income that's going to sustain and support them.
I was in a shelter in September of this year, and I had been out of the closet as gender fluid for a while. In fact, bi gender, so I identify as male and female simultaneously, which is, a lot of people don't know about bi-gender identity. I mean, there's good reason Wilbur calls it alphabet mafia, like that's funny. But I put myself right back in the closet because the only shelters I could access that met my needs and would be safe for me immediately were women's shelters, which only represents half of my identity. And I think in terms of overcoming the things that lead to the instability of being unhoused, being able to be fully yourself is one of the first things and getting better. So when you're accessing spaces that are supposed to be servicing your health and your progress and your stability, and you're regressing in terms of your ability to identify with yourself, there is no mental progress that can be made. Like, when I went back to using she, her pronouns and allowing people to simplify my expression to that degree, I lost my community because I no longer felt I could identify with the queer community because I felt like an imposter. So being in a women's shelter really yeah, I'm sure for anyone, like that could be very reductive. Just the idea of women's shelters, absolutely there need to be women's spaces, but that needs to include trans women. And there need to be spaces where non-binary, gender fluid, two-spirit people, bi-gender, whatever, can represent themselves, because nobody's gonna get better if those spaces aren't available, and nobody's gonna ever get more stable if they can't be themselves.
I think the two of them covered a lot, most of what I was gonna say, so I'm just gonna echo that. I also, just bringing it back to that internal process, you know, we know that mental health supports aren't accessible. We know that it's only just been really recognized, not even equivalent to physical health, but somewhere in that arena in the last maybe decade or so. There's still, you know, people with benefits packages that don't cover counseling. So I think bringing it back to that and considering, you know, the mental anguish that someone might go through, the isolation, the confusion, the rejection, and the guilt and the shame. We know guilt and shame are two of the most difficult emotions, and loneliness that humans can experience. So wrapping that all into one, and then facing instability in terms of your basic needs like housing, I mean, that would be difficult to overcome for anybody, to say the least. And they both spoke a lot on the ways in which people are erased, really. Lazzy was kind in saying reductive, but I'm gonna say erased. Just because you do have to adopt a different way of being. When we consider the patriarchy and capitalism and toxic masculinity and survival needs, people need to adopt a personality that's not theirs when they're experiencing homelessness. I was thinking of how to portray this to people, the importance of pronouns, and I don't know if this will really hit the mark, but I'll try. I was thinking of imagining that every day you're addressed by a demeaning name. Maybe not even every time that you're spoken to, but even just once or twice a day, someone's addressing you by that name. Think of what that would do to your self-esteem and your confidence and your ability to hold your head high and operate and move forward. That's what it, maybe a part of what it feels like to be misgendered on a daily basis.
I think that gave me a lot of ideas, but erasure is, yeah, I'm not gonna be kind about it, erasure. Even at the unnamed treatment center in which I reside, yeah, because I'm not gonna drop names, I was just thinking to myself, would a trans woman ever be welcome to walk through those doors? And the fact that the immediate voice in my head says no. And then when I ask why not, the answer is because, oh, the other woman wouldn't feel safe. It's not even a precedented issue. I feel that staff in treatment centers sometimes make these decisions on behalf of the residents, but if you don't start introducing how things should be to what is, then things will never change. And when you are trying to recover and you're treated like you're predatory or just anything of that nature, I lost what I was gonna say, but yeah, no, that needs to change. Bree's point is really true. I was being way too kind.
Great, thank you so much. Bree, you mentioned there about loneliness. I was wondering if each of you could kind of touch on how loneliness uniquely manifests within the queer community, and what that specifically would look like.
One of the things that I hear from folks in the queer community about loneliness especially comes from a couple of age demographics. And one is young adults who have aged out of youth support kind of peer support groups. They're no longer in school, so they don't have their school groups and peer support at school. They've aged out of those kind of teenage support groups, and now they're young adults and they're kind of just out on their own. And as a queer person, it can be a very, very lonely place to not feel supported. There's something called syndemic theory. And syndemic theory relates to all this different determinants of health, and some of them are social determinants of health. So it's not just your physical health that is impacted, it's your mental health. And loneliness is something that is very prevalent among some of the folks that feel isolated because of who they are, because of their identity. And from the trans community, I can't speak for them, but I can amplify their voices. But the things that I hear are that when you are out in the community and you have eyes rolled at you every day from people, whether it's people that you're serving at your job or people on the street or people when you're out shopping, because of your gender identity, it's very demeaning, and it can create that feeling of wanting to just stay home and isolate and just deal with the loneliness. The other group that I hear from are seniors, and they tell me that they feel as they age, they're becoming invisible. So they're not seen. And there's something called ageism, which most of you will probably know about. But ageism is where you're treated different because of your age, whether it's because you're too young to know or you're too old to know. And as people age, they get dealt with this hand of ageism where people treat them as if they are stupid, don't know, can't figure it out, too slow, those kind of things. So those kind of things lead to that person wanting to isolate as well and not have to deal with the impacts of it. So I think that loneliness, I've created a couple of networking groups. One is for queer seniors, and we do monthly breakfasts down at the Parkinson Cafe, the Parkinson Activity Center. I do a group for a coffee group for gay men once a week. And the stories that I hear from those people that come out, quite often people are, especially since the pandemic, have felt very starved for human connection. And so the loneliness is evident in the stories that I hear.
So there's a lot of intersectionality with the younger queer community and the punk community here in Kelowna. But it seems like that is because there is systemic loneliness, and I can't even imagine what it would be like for older people who can't find a community like that. I mean, we claim the spaces that we can. We find each other and we band together, but it feels like it's in spite of spaces not really being for us most of the time, or designated to us, or even accepting of us. So even somewhere like Danielsen, where there's a lot of shows, and the queer and punk community, at least in my demographic, are quite intertwined. It feels almost a little bit like we've infiltrated a space. And I mean, there is this secret pride and rebellion in doing that, but that shouldn't be the most positive emotion of us taking up space. And the places that do exist, yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is it feels like a lot of our community exists in spite of things. And spite is not a good driving force for community. It's not a bad driving force. It can do a lot of things, but spite is, it comes out of desperation and the need to survive, and us being herd animals. And at the end of the day, taking pride in making a space yours and reclaiming it is a triumph over fear, and it's a fear that shouldn't exist in the first place. I know a lot of people who, when they find community in real life, they've just gotten so used to online connections and situations where they could be exposed to, frankly, child predators, just like so many online connections these days with young queer youth in Kelowna. And I know with loneliness, like, I guess I'm just saying, connection shouldn't be out of desperation. And I think the fact that the most positive moments I've had in the community are moments of rebellion really says how accepting we are as a society whole of queer identities. I do think there's something to be said with the pandemic as well in terms of loneliness and how that affected queer people specifically. Because I do think online communities have emerged and that has beautiful good things, especially with the artists among us. And there is a very vibrant queer art community online and online sellers, but I think a lot of people, myself included, feel like meeting someone like me or who I can identify with in real life is more of a happy accident than anything. Yeah.
I think a lot of the loneliness can come from a sense of being undeserving, living, in a society that is heteronormative, meaning that the assumption is that two a cis man and a cis woman get together and get married, and that's what the assumption is. And if you're anything outside of that, you have to be the brave one to come forward and speak up and face all of the backlash that might come. It might not, but it also might, and that's a very real fear. I lost my train of thought. Okay, you have to be the one to come forward and announce yourself otherwise. That process in and of itself can take years for someone to build up the courage to even say that, to even come to terms with it within themselves. I think it's important to touch on internalized homophobia, internalized transphobia, and internalized rejection in general. When the world around you doesn't reflect you, and when the norm is not you, and you don't see, there's no visible support necessarily, then you're going to internalize that as though you're sort of the fringe person, or you're the odd one, or the one who always has to speak against the grain, or whatever it might be. And all of that, it's a big load to carry, even with a supportive family, even with support behind you and in front of you and around you. Every day is still, you find yourself wondering, is it safe to use my partner's pronouns in this conversation? Even if it's with someone, at a store and you're just chatting. I mean, I'm speaking for myself, keep pronouns to myself for a long time until I know for sure it's safe, or I think it's safe to say otherwise. Because I don't want to deal with someone's negative reaction. I don't want even someone's second take at you, or microaggression that they might share can be enough to throw you off for the rest of the day and remind you of other emotions that you might have had previously. So I think that, yes, we've come a long way in acceptance and representation and everything else that has to be acknowledged. But I can say for sure, like I mentioned, that I don't share my partner's pronouns until I know it's safe. Something as simple as, years ago, dancing at a bar with some friends, dancing with my partner at the time, and looking over to see two men holding a camera this close to our faces, saying, "That's so hot." I know it's probably not appropriate to share, but that's the reality of the things that happen, It's, it's just, there's always just this sense of, you know, maybe today's the day that someone doesn't like me for who I am. And that's a scary place to be.
I just want to add one more thing to that, because I started the thought, didn't finish it for you. I was talking about syndemic theory, but what it relates to is the contribution of many different factors to poor outcomes for health. And one of the things in that study talks about people doing, having behaviors that are at risk. So doing things that are going to contribute to further bad outcomes, such as substance use and self-harm and those kind of things. And so that just creates a perpetual kind of circle that's really, really hard to get out of. And those things can then in themselves, in that whole theory and that circle, can lead to homelessness, it can lead to isolation, it can lead to loneliness, all of the things that are part of the conversation that we're having today.
I think we'll have time for one last question from me, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. So what can service providers or nonprofits do to make their services and programs more friendly to the 2S LGBTQ+ community?
Number one is safety, in my mind. It's creating safe spaces for folks from the queer community, safe spaces for trans folks, non-binary folks, folks that don't fit the heteronormative cisgender picture that people have for everyone, and cultural safety in terms of training, accreditation for staff would be one thing. Being able to create inclusive spaces and know what that means. Training is one of the things that will help solve that problem, and it reduces barrier to access of services. So for example, some treatment centers are faith-based treatment centers, but that creates a huge barrier for folks who have are in the situation they are because of religious trauma. So that's one thing that needs to be certainly addressed in terms of how those operations are funded and how people are attracted into them, because I know of folks who have actually come out of a program like that and it was their life was over. They chose not to live because of the trauma that they faced inside of the treatment center. So I think there's a few things. Money and funding, we heard about that before, is key in creating, because I don't really think that there's any particular niche services for the queer community for homeless folks in Kelowna. You just have to fit into the broad kind of category of homeless people where the unique needs of those folks are not addressed in any way, meaningful way at all. So I think that I sit on the advisory board for homelessness in Kelowna, and when I ask for the stats of, how many of those people are trans, how many people are non-binary, how many are gay, lesbian, people have to self-identify, and they don't need to identify as any particular demographic when they're going into services or they're being counted as a homeless person. So we really lack information and accurate data. So that is one thing that's missing, is having actual accurate demographic data to recognize and identify the need based on who the people are. And not just lumping everybody into one kind of category of homeless people. We've already heard that seniors have particular needs. The queer community also has particular needs when it comes to accessing services and lifting them out of the situation that they're in. And in terms of the other thing is, it's not just the services, but it's the law enforcement that's involved in these kind of things, that there needs to be more supports in terms of mental health support on the street, and supporting these folks versus just treating it as a law enforcement issue. I think that's starting to happen a bit from what I can see in Kelowna, but it also particularly impacts the queer community who have police trauma, and it's actually like built into the community, to especially the trans community, to deal with police officers is very traumatic just seeing them. So that is another aspect that needs to be taken into account. And Bree can probably talk more about this, but more funding for mental health support is critical. You know, there are free programs like This Space Belongs to You does for BIPOC and queer youth, but what about seniors? What about adults in the population that don't have access to mental health support because they have no funds and no benefits? And to get into free programs, there's huge long wait lists. So that's that would be another thing that's really, really critical.
My mind immediately went to the range of gender affirming care and how critical that is to the mental health of queer people, whether they're housed or not. There are going to be people suffering gender dysphoria who can't access binders or whatever they may need to feel at home in their own skin. Particularly on the street, you are so exposed. Well, you can hide yourself away in a tent, but you are exposed. You don't have shelter, you don't have walls. To be seen and to not be seen as yourself is extremely anxiety, shame inducing in and of itself. For me, as a gender fluid, bi-gender person, I don't know what gender affirming care would look like, but I know it needs to be accessible to all people, no matter their positions in life, and it shouldn't be treated as cosmetic, as it often is. Getting on a wait list in Kelowna and getting an actual appointment for even the consultation for a top surgery, as I know from my queer platonic partner, is extremely hard. And he's been on hormones and HRT for a while now, and he still had to go to Vancouver to find a doctor who was willing to treat him, because depending on the doctor, there's still just such an attitude of discrimination. And I think a lot of the care providers that are accessible to unhoused people, or people who don't have a family doctor, or who don't have a medical history because their housing situation's been unstable for a long time. Even getting like that history of appointments and all of those things in order so you can get the care you need, let alone getting the care. Like, that is a process of years of feeling uncomfortable in one's own skin. And yeah, I definitely think that service providers need to be aware that in no way should it be considered cosmetic for people to get gender affirming care or any queer specific care, even HIV prevention. Like, I can't speak to that myself, but I just think there's an attitude of it being seen as a luxury, and it's not a luxury because no one can afford to be. Think about when your body rejects a transplant or its own cells, or your immune system Is it hacking itself? We don't think of that as people being dramatic when they can't eat gluten or they need some kind of care related to that. And I don't see trans and queer identity any differently in terms of care that should be provided.
I think when we're talking about what nonprofits and service providers can do to create more safety, we've covered, steering away from the binary, having gender neutral options available in terms of washrooms and showers and sleeping arrangements, training staff to know what to say, what not to say, how to approach the person. So we talk a lot about trauma-informed care, which is based in the idea that when you're working with someone, you can just assume that they've experienced trauma. You don't have to ask, they don't have to go through every detail to recount it, you just assume. So you can assume that they're gonna react maybe defensively or retreat if you use a really loud tone, that's an example of it. So I think when we talk about trauma-informed care for queer and trans folks, don't be afraid to ask. I think that sometimes when we don't have the lived experience, if we haven't been in their shoes or known people in their shoes, we tend to tiptoe around the idea because we don't want to make them feel different. But the truth is that they already feel different, they already know that they're different, and pretending that they're not is also erasing that fact. And asking them, what would make you feel more comfortable here? Even if you do have gendered washrooms, saying, is there something we can do to work around that? Do you want us to talk to the other participants or clients around? Do you want us to keep this between you and I? How can we support you? Like offering that creates such safety and can begin to create trust with someone. I think if you're working with any marginalized identity, whether it be race or gender or sexuality, you can assume that they have been marginalized and put down based on that identity. So working with them to sort of minimize that harm and that marginalization, and just offering that and asking it straight up, obviously just when it's the two of you, can go so far in terms of trust and rapport building and safety. I think the rest of them covered the rest of what I was gonna talk about. So that's that.
Oscar? I'm really interested in your experience with mental health in our community specifically, and the intersection not only of queer identity and homelessness, but with neurodivergence as well. And are there spaces available? What does that look like? What are your thoughts basically about how we can make the world safer for our neurodivergent queer people?
Yeah, there's definitely good question. How to make it safer, I think today, is similar to like what we discussed here, and also offering in terms of neurodivergence, fidget toys, things that people can sort of play with, like a bracelet, while they're, they might be intimidated or not making eye contact. Maybe they need to stand up, maybe you need to walk while you talk. Really veering away from colonial beliefs and the way that we've structured this society to mean if you're not making eye contact, then you don't respect me, or you're not taking it seriously, or if you're standing at the back of the room, it's because you, I don't know, you don't know how to pay attention in this class, you don't know how to give respect to someone in power. All these assumptions really that we make actually, I think the solution is to not make assumptions.
Yeah.
Like, come to things with an open mind and just see someone for who they are without imposing what you think they should be. Which brings me to something I forgot to mention earlier, is that people fear what they don't understand. And I think that when I have these conversations around gender with folks that are opposed to, let's say, trans athletes competing in sport, it always comes down to this idea of, but why do you need to understand it? Like, what does it do for you to understand why someone is the way they are, why they want to use certain pronouns, why they identify in a certain way? It doesn't actually matter whether you understand it or not, because it's not you living that life. All that is asked of you is to just be an open-minded person, a supportive person, and a non-judgmental person. I don't know if I answered.
That was a perfect answer.
And that's actually a perfect segue because we're gonna start opening questions to audience participation. If you have any questions, raise your hand and we'll pass you a mic.
This question probably ties in a lot with what you guys were just talking about. But are there programs available to combat stigma in this area? And when we're accessing programs, are there things available to support and nourish intersectional identities?
I can start just by talking about the space belongs to you. Now we're only a year and a half old, if that, probably that. And as far as I know, we are the only organization that serves specifically queer and trans youth outside of etc. with the Bridge, who holds Thursday drop-in program for youth. Yeah, we offer no-cost counseling, gender affirming care in terms of binders and packers and tape and everything else. And also the model is sort of based in the idea that it's like for us, by us. So when you see your counselor sitting across from you, you know that you're reflected in them and vice versa, which creates, you know, an automatic sense of safety. Oh yeah, resources. Yeah, so that's this space, and I'll pass it along.
I'm actually really excited because I, as a queer local youth, didn't even know about this space belongs to you. So I'm definitely going to be telling people about what you guys do. I think actually that does segue into my point is we find a resource that is usually for us, by us, and then we have to be kind of proactive about spreading it around. Like, I know quite a lot of the queer community here is connected, even with the like queer community in Vancouver. I know lots of people in Vancouver. They know lots of people here. Kelowna Foundry is where I met my queer platonic partner at their Tuesdays with Peers. And I wanted to say that a lot of our, like the programs and resources that are available aren't definitionally queer, but because of such high rates of intersectionality with mental health experiences and queer identity, I've met a lot of people through just community resources that are like peer groups for mental health. But that's very hit or miss because anytime a space isn't for us, by us, it is one of those things where our presence is more of a reclamation than a representation. So I'm really excited to hear about this spaces for you.
There's a couple of other organizations I'd like to mention. One is my day job. I work for a nonprofit based out of Vancouver called Health Initiative for Men, and my work is primarily focused on HIV prevention. but what that means is programs and services that keep people connected. And we also have clinical health, mental health support, which is either free or on a sliding scale based on income for gay, bi, queer, men and gender diverse people. So we have it on our website. It's called checkhimout.ca. People can apply for to get into a clinical health, mental health program. And we utilize people who are in training and students to give the free counseling, but they are supervised. There's a group called Transparent Okanagan, and Transparent Okanagan is a very vital resource for parents of trans, gender diverse, non-binary kids to provide peer support for them. There's an organization called Transcare BC, which has a multitude of resources and some funding for groups as well for trans folks. And there is a local peer support group called Okanagan Gender Identity Group, which is very fundamental in providing peer support for trans and non-gender and or gender diverse non-binary folks. And they have a Discord group, a Facebook group, and they do weekly or monthly drop-ins at the library as well, and a weekly Zoom call. And one of the organizations that Advocacy Canada also supports is called the Okanagan Freak Alliance. And Lazzy mentioned intersectionality with punk, rock, and the non-binary and trans community. So they put on regular events, which we go out and support as volunteers from Advocacy Canada. And that's really, really amazing because it's all ages. They're dry events. They are just a whole group of people that love being able to express themselves through punk rock music and scream and let their feelings out and have a mosh pit and all the things that I don't do anymore because I probably end up breaking my hips. But it's really wonderful to see the community connection that's created in those groups. Etc. was already mentioned, and that's a peer support group as well, but it's provided with support from adults who are trained to do that kind of work. I was one of the founders of Etc. back in 2013 when I was on the board of Kelowna Pride, and I was in Ottawa and I saw a group called Etc. perform at a national Pride conference, and it was a group of young people, and they sang True Colors, and they had the whole room in tears. And I brought the idea back to Kelowna, and we started it as a volunteer group, and we were having weekly drop-ins with just board members from Kelowna Pride volunteering to run it, and it got out of hand because we just couldn't keep up. And so we turned it over to Living Positive Resource Center to run for a while, and then they turned it over to the Bridge, which is a natural fit for it. When I was working for Rogers Communications a couple of years ago, and I won the Employee of the Year and the CEO Award and the Humanitarian Award for doing work in the community, and they gave me $15,000 to give to a charity, so I gave it to Etc. So it was really, really great to see that. The other thing is Kelowna Pride is coming up. I used to be the president of the board. I'm not on the board anymore because I've got a lot of other things on my plate, but they're having, speaking of intersectionality, they're having their very first Two-Spirit powwow during Pride Week. Say yay to that! So that's going to be amazing. I also started the very first Trans Pride March in Kelowna a few years ago, and that march is one of the biggest Trans Pride marches in Canada. And it's really great to see the community come out. So if you're looking for ways to be allies and support folks, come out to some of those events.
Is Stephanie still here, one of the organizers? I was just wondering a bit about the organization of the day, because we ended the earlier panel asking what kinds of conversations are now taking place. And we also had Ian there representing the senior support group, so I wanted to ask Malcolm, can you get support from his group when you have needs? And wondered, we also had Carmen Rempel here from one of the faith-based organizations. Why wasn't there opportunity for these two panels to interact on some of these issues?
To answer the question about the groups that support the queer community, there's quite a few here. And I've actually reached out to Ian a few times for help. I believe you were involved in helping, were you involved in helping find a new long-term care home for that person, the trans person? No, you weren't? Okay. I'm surprised you weren't, but you would have stepped in if you knew about it, I'm sure. Ian and I keep bumping into each other all the time in terms of the circles that we work in. But there's also, to speak about, you mentioned faith-based organizations. There's actually a lot of faith-based organizations that are very, very supportive. We're sitting in the hall of one of them here, which I'm very grateful for. But we also have to remember that some folks wouldn't want to come here because they would feel triggered by it. But it's a very good conversation to have. And in terms of the dialogue that needs to happen between the different groups like the faith-based organizations and the queer community are critical in terms of addressing some of these past issues and things that continue to rise up and are very predominant in our culture and society.
I agree completely with what you just addressed, and I think there's been an underlying current of speaking to the idea that we have a lot of responsibility as queer people for showing up in these spaces, for representing, for whatnot. And I do feel that responsibility showing up in a church today, because I do have religious trauma. It is triggering, but I feel that there is a lot of inherent pressure to be bridges of sorts for us. Reference to the bridge, not intended. And I'm grateful for the space, very grateful, honored, in fact. But in terms of conversations not being had, I think the conversations are being had. I think the queer community is extremely proactive, at least members of us are, in speaking up for us. And I would say, and not to be controversial, but there's a lot of responsibility on faith-based organizations, as many do, and just society as a whole to listen. Because I think many of us have been very outspoken about many things for very long. And I think now we're finally getting more representation. And there's a cultural norm of respect for people's identities that's starting to cultivate in spaces. And there are many, many faith-based organizations who are very supportive of that. I don't know. who the onus is on as a whole to hear the voices of people having these conversations, but I know the conversations are happening.
So we are actually. Basically came down to time constraints. And so we look forward to more opportunities to be hosting panels such as this and to be able to be having a larger panel connected together too. I would like to give us time for one last question and then wrap up. I do understand some folks may need to leave now. Totally understand that, but maybe if we could have one more question and then sign off for the day.
I just wanted to start by thanking you for sharing and being very vulnerable with all of us. So thank you for that. We do put the onus a lot of time on people to share their stories, which can be quite triggering. And the responsibility is more from all of us instead of always having to learn from people like yourself. So I do really appreciate that.
To be fair, you are here and listening and going out of your way, staying overtime to listen. So I think these conversations being had in these spaces and people going out of their way to listen is like a good sign that things are going in the direction that they need to go. So thank you.
I wanted to ask the question around, we heard on the first panel around lived experience. So I'm thinking about, and it was really helpful to hear what safe spaces would look like for trans people in a shelter, perhaps. I had an experience in post-secondary that I've been involved in with a student who asked about the gender neutral bathrooms. And as of 3 years ago, we had none. So, you know, they sat with their legs closed for 3 hours because they didn't go to the bathroom on campus. They had a lot of confidence and I was able to connect them to facilities and they were helped to design our gender neutral bathrooms. But why did it have to take something that was so long in the process? So are there opportunities for our queer folks to be at the decision-making tables, but in spaces that resonate with them? I know we tried to have you when Jamie was involved in the experience circles, and the governance committee levels didn't really appeal to them. It intimidated them, it didn't invite them. So what would it look like? How would we bring in people with lived experience to be decision makers in formats that would be appropriate and open for them to participate? Like, how do we do that? So you can have a role in helping to make some of these decisions of safe spaces and shelters or other places. How do we do that?
We have the microphone this one's back. I think it really comes down to having people share how they would like to contribute. So it doesn't have to look like sitting around a boardroom table. It could be sitting on the lawn in City Park. It doesn't have to look like a workshop where you're stuck in a room for a day. It could look like sitting down for dinner. One of the things that we didn't really talk about is food insecurity. And there always needs to also be an exchange and not just have people give their emotional labor for nothing. And we see that demand a lot, where people are demanded to do things. Oh, we need stats on, something for homelessness, and so we're gonna involve the homeless people, but what do they get for that? I think it's really important that we meet people at their table and not have to force them to come to ours. In terms of how participation looks. And we've already heard about diversions, and that we have to respect that the needs of people in terms of their mental health and wellness and their social capabilities as well. And it always doesn't have to look a certain way. So I think it's important that those things are addressed in terms of, you know, just sitting down and checking in, doing check-ins with folks in terms of how does it look like for you to participate in a meaningful way, and how can we assist you, can we feed you, can we address some of your concerns? We had a Trans-Day of Visibility event a year ago in Kelowna. There was 300 people came out to it, and my employer sponsored $1,000 worth of pizza for that event, and there was people lined up that missed out because we didn't have enough, and there was people that were saying that they hadn't eaten in 2 days. And so now we're trying to ensure that we address food insecurity at our events, where we actually make sure we have enough food, and we're setting up tables, pantry tables, that we have food for them to take home that they can put in their pantry and address that food insecurity. So there's many different ways that we can encourage participation and turn provide some meaningful way to repay that involvement.
As someone who grew up in care and first expressed my identity with freedom with my foster parents, especially because my first therapy was play therapy through the Métis Center, which was gracious enough because of the intersection with my foster siblings being Indigenous and in care, and the statistics of kids in care being Indigenous. They were welcoming and they shared their space. And long before I knew what two-spirit identity was, or by gender, whatnot, there was already some affirmation just through that solidarity. And I think it was extremely damaging aging out of care and having foster siblings even move on, because something that had been such an integral part of my experiencing of myself, those doors were, fair enough, as a white person, closed to me. And what I'm advocating for is not being represented in other people's spaces. What I'm advocating for is a sense of continuity in all of the aspects of our life. Because there's so many things where, for example, I aged out and I went back into housing instability that had permeated my childhood because I couldn't stay with my foster parent because that was a violation of the ministry. Like, we're not allowed to find families where we will, unless there's a sense of continuity in what we are providing to people. And so that means with things like Kelowna Foundry, actually creating an aging out plan and preparing people for what transitioning out of services means seems very critical to me. And people continuing to grow into themselves.
And for those of you who don't know, Lazzy is referring to when you're youth and you turn, what is it, 25? 25, yeah. Once you turn 25, you're no longer considered a youth, so the services get cut off.
And then if you grow up in foster care, once you're 19, you no longer get MCFD support. You get tuition provisions, but you don't get, for example, people to direct you to the fact that you have your tuition covered because you were in care. Like, aging out is very, scary. And I think if we're talking about homelessness, like, that is something that needs to be talked about on both the level of like CMHA and MCFD.
Really. I think like a common theme in all of these things is just that oftentimes the solutions that are presented are presented by people who aren't necessarily on the ground. like client facing, so to speak. They're kind of out of touch with what we actually need, as the previous panel spoke about. I think Wilbur made a good call in terms of inviting people to our table or going to their table, coming to our table, instead of having us go to yours. The labor and the responsibility as a queer person in Kelowna, which is a pretty homogenous, community.
I'll speak after. I also wanted to say that Wilbur was quite, I just remembered, I wanted to say the neurodivergent and the punk and the queer communities all intersect, because mosh pits, for some of us, are literally our way of self-regulating, and some of us love loud music and vibing, and it's a place where we can be considered normal, whereas if we're just rocking like this, as I would be doing if I weren't masking, yeah, that's not socially acceptable, but mosh pits totally are. So a lot of very, sorry, that just came to mind. I wanted to comment on it. Come to our tables, come to these events where you can actually see people being themselves. Because if we come to your tables, there's a chance that we're not gonna be comfortable. It's the first thing. The conversations that need to be had are more havable, and if you come to us.
Have some fun too.
Yeah. Just to finish, yeah, it's a pretty homogenous society here, and we're carrying a lot of weight. And I guess the really helpful thing that people can do as allies is educate yourself and learn and come to these things and carry those voices at your tables.
Thank you guys all so much. I hope you guys, people said, carry these conversations with you. And yeah, thank you guys all for coming. I really appreciate it.
Just as a final piece, I want to make note on your way out of some posters that are on the table where Emily and Sabrina are. If you could give a wave. This is for the upcoming Hate to Hope immersive exhibit in partnership with Alternator, British Columbia's Office of the Human Rights Commissioner. So please check those posters out, and we hope that you are able to attend the event and the exhibit. And to our panelists, a big round of applause again. Thank you so very much. The recording of this event will be available on our website next week. I'm so sorry that we were not able to get to all of your questions, and I'm sure there are lots of questions in the Zoom, and so what that tells me is that we need to do more of this. So if that's something that you're interested in, please keep following us on our social media, our websites. Send us an email if you have an idea for an event. We're very happy to host them, and thank you so very much to Sarah. If it wasn't for Sarah, this event wouldn't have been possible. So thank you for coming all the way out to Kelowna. Have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Oh, yes, I'm sorry, thank you to our students. I'll give you back to church.